Hello, my name's Jackie Kay and I'm Chancellor of the University of Salford and also the Scottish Macker, or the National Poet of Scotland. For years I've been coming to Manchester Literature Festival and I really admire the whole festival. I admire its ethos, I admire the way that you support activists and political thinkers as well as writers known and less well known. I admire the way that you support writers in translation. I admire your Manchester sermon. I think the events have a great buzz and energy to them, and I've been at so many over the years. I've loved doing events myself, often with my dear friend Ali Smith. They've been fantastic events. I've also loved attending events like the Manchester Sermon, which have given me food for thought for a very, very long time. But it's upsetting to me that you're in danger now, and I would really love anybody who supports you and literature, new writing and writers around the world to dig a wee bit into your pocket and pay the price of a drink or the price of a theatre ticket or anything that you could actually afford, and go on the website www.manchesterliteratureFestival.co.uk. Cheers.
This is like being convicts, isn't it? You're there. Good, good. Everybody's out there. We're here. And I am so excited and so delighted to be able to be hosting this event today. Two writers that I've been following, I've been reading, that I'm interested in because, you know, I was a young writer once, thinking about the delights of it, the difficulties of it, how you make your way, how you start to shape the world in which you're making your way. So what I want to do, Sophie, Daisy, is I want you to both be able to read a little bit from your new novels. Daisy, you've got Sisters, Sophie, Blue Ticket. I hope everybody can see the covers somewhere on all of this. And then we'll talk a little bit. Yeah, great. If you got yours there, wave it out. I hope that you will be able to talk a little bit individually. And then what we'll try and do is open the conversation. So the three of us are talking together. And then later we'll bring in our friends who come from all over the world to share this. So, Sophie, Blue Ticket, would you like to start by just reading a little bit to us, if you've got a page or two at the beginning that particularly resonates with you, and then we'll start to talk about the book. Are you there? Daisy, you're there. Where's Sophie gone?
I can't see her. Do you want me to read first?
Oh,
she's disappeared.
Sorry, am I not coming through? I just asked Sophie if she would read.
Yeah, we heard you, and then she disappeared.
She's disappeared. Right, in that case, Daisy, right, Sisters, are you prepared to go right in there and read to us?
I'm ready. And then hopefully,
if you're ready, I'm ready. Let's do it. Sophie, let's do it.
Hopefully she'll pop back up again. Thank you.
Yeah. What we'll do is you can read a bit. You and I will talk for a bit. Hopefully Sophie will pop back up, and then we'll run it that way.
Yeah, good plan.
We're on it.
Okay, we've got it.
Go girl.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming to this event. I can see you all talking down the side. Oh, there's Sophie.
Sophie, we just swapped round because we had a bit of disappearance. We got a bit of connection horror. So Daisy's going to go ahead first.
So I'm going to read from my new novel, Sisters. I'm going to read from about halfway through the book. The book is narrated mostly by a young girl living in a house with her mother and sister, but the part I'm going to read is actually narrated by her mother, who's talking about her two daughters and one of her memories about them. And it's a memory about Halloween, which I thought was a good one for this time of year. Okay, here we go. The Halloween, September was 13. Both of them suddenly grown long, limbs flung all over the place, mouths jammed with tangles of teeth, hacking at a pumpkin on the kitchen table. She'd started initiating separate dinner plans with them both, once every other week. One would be left at home and she'd take the other for noodles or to the cinema. It enraged September, who would often refuse to speak, chomp away at her food, but she thought maybe July quietly liked it, a chance to speak about school or the books she was reading without September's voice overlaying her own. They had never celebrated Halloween before, but the girls had got into horror films and been planning for months what they would do. The house was speckled with hanging spiders and fake cobwebs, buckets of squashy eyeballs. She tripped over a cheap plastic broomstick in the hallway. They were in the kitchen with the pumpkins spread over the walls, witch hats shoved onto their heads. Maybe I could come with you, Sheila said at 6:30 when they were lighting the candles for the pumpkin, putting on their outfits. Maybe not, September said. July's face was pained. Sheila wished she hadn't said anything, had known better. The night before, September had come up behind her and wrapped her arms around her middle, squeezing in a way she hadn't done since she was 5. The relief of it had made her think she could overstep the carefully laid out boundaries. Someone, said July, ever the peacekeeper, needs to stay here to give out the sweets. At 7 o'clock, they went trick-or-treating, and she left the house in secret and walked a safe distance behind them. She lingered behind hedges and watched them approach houses, July's head tipped towards September's, listening. They had dressed as the sisters from The Shining, powdered their faces with flour, curled their hair. They would never look the same. July was too like her, and September too like her father for that, but there was something about the way they moved that was disconcerting, like unfinished doppelgangers, turning their heads at the same time. There weren't many other children out, but there were a few, and she watched July and September plotting tactics, peering into small children's buckets to see if somewhere was worth visiting. It got darker, and she could shift closer, sometimes hear the things they said to each other, the clink of sweets in the mixing bowl July was carrying around. She wanted very desperately to move into the pool from street lamps and walk with them, but she kept away, tailed them doggedly, paused as they knocked and came out cackling with glee at what they had got. They went up the long path to a house, and she leaned against the wall and gazed away down the street at the bikes chained up, the rattle of a bus. When she turned back, they were gone. She walked swiftly, but she could not find them. By a lamppost, she found their bowl of sweets set down. She panicked then and ran around, asked some passing people, thought of calling the police, and instead ran back to check the house, went shouting through the rooms, turned around to see September standing in the open doorway alone, her face wiped clean, expectant. July is gone, she thought. I shouldn't have looked away. I knew this would happen. Where, she started to say, and then July was there, smiling, saying they'd lost all the sweets. Never mind. Never mind, she said, reaching out for them. Afterwards, and she hated herself for the thought, she wondered if September had orchestrated it. That difficult, wonderful child who had fought her since she was born, refused food, ignored her breast, hated any of the toys she bought, who knew just how to antagonize her without, it seemed, even trying. Had she, in fact, known that she was following them and planned everything so that Sheila would find the set-down bowl of sweets, would see September coming in first through the door and think that something had happened to July? September could make her sister do anything, had always been able to. The way September was with July sometimes reminded her of how Peter, their father, had been with her, his withholding of love for tactical advantage, the control concealed within silky folds of care. It wasn't the same, she thought over and over. September was not like that man, except sometimes she wondered. Thank you.
Thank you. I know you can't see me, so I really am the disembodied voice now. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't. It need not matter because it's about you. Daisy, you love triangles, don't you? Because we've got our 3 characters here, September and July, and their mother Sheila, and was in everything under. I love that book. We've got Gretel, the mother, and we've got her daughter, and we've got the strange Marcus, who both shapeshifts and appears through watery landscapes. What is it about the tension of the triangle that you love so much that seems to work for you so well? Because it creates this claustrophobic, intense space.
Yeah, no one's ever put it that way before, and I'm really pleased you said that, and I think that will help me in writing my next book. I think I love trapping characters in places, and I think triangles between people are another way to really trap characters and make it difficult for them to escape or to control what's happening to them. And I think it's such an uncomfortable number, the 3, and I think you really see that in Everything Under and in Sisters as well, where as you sort of heard in that reading, the mother really doesn't feel like she can connect to the daughters. I think that's perhaps what it is about triangles, but no one's ever said it that way before, and I think it's a really interesting way of thinking about it.
Because you've got inside the shape, there is that sense of being trapped, and that everybody is connected fatally in a way that they can't escape. But at the same time, as you say, they always feel disconnected in your books. Everyone is desperately trying to connect with everybody else and feeling that they're failing. Even in the terrifying Sisters, where one is in fact inside the other. And it is a Greek myth, like you talk about that, don't you? Because I think the Greek myths have been a big influence on you. The idea of being able to sort of swallow or consume another person so that they are you, as well as not being present at all.
Yeah, it's funny because I think it's a strange year to have a book out anyway, but a lot of people have been talking about Sisters as a sort of, novel of the isolation or a novel of COVID times. And I think perhaps that's how we're all feeling at the moment, that we're in incredibly close proximity to a lot of people, our family, the people we're living with, but we're also incredibly isolated and often very lonely in a way that many of us haven't necessarily been before. And I think I've always loved those characters who are in those positions, who are incredibly isolated, sort of on the outside, kind of stuck in that liminal space between too much contact and not enough contact. I think those are the characters I really love writing about.
Yeah, and is that the human condition, that we're always alone and always too close?
Yeah, I think the grass is always greener a little, isn't it? And I think for writers, and I think this happens a little in Sophie's book as well. I think for writers, those characters are a bit of a gift. Those characters who are always striving for something just over the horizon, and whatever they find, it's not quite right. And I think in novels, the characters which are most exciting are the ones who are discontented, even if they don't necessarily know what they're discontented about.
Very strong focus in both of your novels on women's lives, women's experience, women's inner experience, which again is always bursting out into the world, which looks calm or disinterested around them. And there's this frightening kinetic energy. What is it? What is it about when you're sitting down to write? You've written 2 books. You think, I'm going to have women characters, or do they just spring up for you? Is this natural to you? Is it a conscious decision, or is it simply the thing that you must do? These are the people you need to write about.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think when I first started writing, when I was writing short stories, I purposely thought I want to write about women, and definitely now, sort of working on novels, I feel very compelled to explore the lives of women and what it means to be a woman in the society, and what it means, I think, in particular, and I think this is very relevant to Sophie's book as well, what it means to be a woman and have a body, or be trans and have a body, and be a little outside of society, and be trying to manage that, and while also managing having a body and everything that means. And I think my obsession comes through about the body a lot in the characters I'm interested in, and they're often teenage girls or pregnant women, people who are sort of having this a little bit of a fight with their own selves and with their own bodies, which they have to carry around, but which they don't necessarily feel very natural doing so.
And there's a strong metaphor, isn't there, in Sisters, about the body being a house and the house being a body, and those things being interchangeable in sort of the way they are in Ovid, really, in Metamorphosis, where something could in fact erupt into another shape altogether. The way it does, I guess, for a woman in pregnancy and in giving birth, which, Sophie, is something that's going to be very strong in your novel as well, the idea of what it's like to be overtaken by another creature inside you, or not overtaken by that creature at all. And of course, in your case, to have that decided by somebody else. I mean, I was reading an interview with you, Sophie, where you said that suddenly in your late 20s, you thought, oh, I want a baby. What is happening? Who's this I that wants a baby? I'm supposed to be in control, and something else is coming in and being in control. And that sense of the body both as being absolutely our home and absolutely alien, being possessed, taken over by either some longings or some urgings, or more sinisterly, directives from outside. So I just want to bring you in there, Sophie, because I'm going to ask you to read in a minute. Just as we've touched on bodies now, it seems a good moment for you to make a little body response, and then we'll just take you into your book, and then I'll bring you in together.
Sure. Should I read now, or yeah? Should I read? Yeah.
Okay. Would you like to?
Yeah, of course. Sorry.
Tell us which bit you're going to read from.
So I'm going to read a bit from the start of Blue Ticket. Basically, in Blue Ticket, you pick a lottery. You pick a lottery ticket. You pick a blue ticket, which means you cannot have children. You pick a white ticket, which means you can. So I'm going to read a part from the beginning where Calla, the main character, she's thinking about what a blue ticket means and kind of wrestling with, kind of bouncing around her ideas essentially about what it means for her and her future. That's how your life becomes a set thing, written and unchangeable. It was an object that did not really belong to me, and to wish for any other was a fallacy at best, treasonous at worst. Blue ticket. Don't underestimate the relief of a decision being taken away from you. Blue ticket. I was not motherly. It had been judged that it wasn't for me by someone who knew better than I did. Blue ticket. There was a lack in my brain, my body, my soul, or something. There was a flaw I should not pass on, a warmth I was missing. Blue ticket. My life was precious enough as it was. I wasn't to be risked. Blue ticket. Some called it a noble sacrifice, others a mercy. It meant a different thing every time I thought about it. Years were frenetic, then calmer. They ticked with the inevitability of a metronome, some fallow and some interesting. Things could happen to a blue ticket woman the way they might not for a white ticket. Spirit of adventure. In practice, life felt smaller than that expansiveness promised. In the dark night, I stood in my kitchen, smoking, watching the lights of my neighbours go off one at a time. I no longer asked men the age of my father to hit me in the face or stayed up 3 nights at a time. I lived mostly a quiet life. My impulses were not always uncontrollable as they seemed. By now, I knew which ones would make me happy and which would not. Sometimes I became aware that there was somewhere I could not go, and I wanted to go there. Who wouldn't when told it was impossible? Motherhood was the last perversion, otherwise known as loving and being loved. It was the only one closed off to me. I want. There was a purity to that feeling that other sensations were, a simplicity, even as it remained the most complicated thing in the world. Sometimes I would still go out looking for trouble. Sometimes I would sit up at a bar on the other side of the city and order drink after drink, staring at someone until they stared back, and then the dance began, inelegant but replete with its own pull and push. These rituals felt important to me. They made an object of my desire, helped me to feel out its edges and crevices, and yet the shape of it slid away from me like water. Choice is an illusion, said a woman redoing her lipstick next to me in the bathroom mirror of a bar one evening. Don't you ever think about how everything is just completely futile? I hadn't actually said anything. I do even now have that sort of face where strangers often talk to me, ranting or confessing like I am somebody they already know. This woman was more beautiful than me. She had hair feathering around her jaw, a mouth painted the colour of dark blood. Maybe she was very drunk, or maybe she was an emissary, designed to show us what good blue ticket women looked like and felt, how free one could be if one totally embraced what one was given. I wasn't sure if emissaries did operate like that, but I had my suspicions. I wanted to kiss her anyway because I still believed in beauty, because I wanted her good attitude to infect me, because I was also drunk, and because I was never satisfied. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a terrifying novel, and obviously you've talked about your instances, whether it's Margaret Atwood, Angela Carter, but separate to any influences in there is it's a very bleak vision of where we might end up as a society. I mean, as a young woman in the world writing now, do you feel that women's choices are actually being narrowed down to the point where they may even be prescribed by others?
Well, the thing about Blue Ticket, I always think is, there's, when I was writing it, I was like, there's so many kind of amazing reproductive dystopias out there. And my focus is almost more on like the kind of that internal battle. I feel like as young women, there is this, I think, we've kind of been living in an age where we do for the first time almost have the choice. It's kind of like, and with so many reasons not to have children, like climate change. And I mean, now we're in, COVID. There's a lot of good reasons not to have children, essentially, and so it's kind of like an interesting to have.
Sophie, are you there? Daisy, you're there?
I'm there. I think she might have lost her Wi-Fi for the moment. I think she's trying to
keep her. While we're fixing her up, I'm going to bring you in on that question about. I mean, we look at America. We see that Roe versus Wade may be overturned quite soon if Amy Coney Barrett has her way. That women's lives that were suddenly opening up do seem to be narrowing down. I mean, Margaret was prescient about that in 1985, and we all watched The Handmaid's Tale. I mean, there's always a political element to everybody's writing, and people who say my writing is not political are making a political statement. But given what Sophie was just talking about there, while we bring her back in, I mean, do you feel, as a young woman, as a woman writing now, that you are also trying to write about, the state of women's lives in the world and how they're managed and conditioned internally, as she says, as well as externally?
Oh, have we got her? We've got her. There she is.
Come back in a minute. I'm just going to get Daisy to answer this question because we're just moving it along, and I'll bring you in.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think some writers say they're not political, but I think inevitably your writing becomes political, and especially I think if you're a woman, because as Sophie's saying, the personal is very political for women at the moment, and every choice that you make becomes very political. And I remember being in my young 20s and finding it very noticeable, that point where you begin being asked if you're going to have children and how many children you're going to have and what they're going to be called and how you feel about it, in a way that I don't think men are. And I think that's an incredibly political thing, and something that I do think seeps into the writing. And I think writers are sponges and magpies. And they steal things, and they see what's going on around them, and they take things in. So I think every book is part of its times, and we're living in an incredibly difficult and stressful time, and I think that seeps into the writing.
Sophie, we were just saying before you lost you, return to us. Can you continue your train of thought?
Yes. So where did you hear up to me? Where did I get up to?
Talking about, I think you were talking about the personal, your personal.
Sorry, I'm not hearing Sophie at
Sorry
all.
about that.
I can hear you, Daisy. I can't hear Sophie.
Can you hear me now?
Can you hear Sophie?
I can hear Sophie, yeah.
Okay. Speak, Sophie.
So yeah, thinking about the personal as opposed to political, but like what Daisy says is kind of really separating the two. And yeah, we do live in a world where patriarchy consistently refuses to let women have rights over their own body, and forcibly sterilizing people is a thing that's happened and continues to happen. So kind of wrestling with this internal battle of colour, which is a lot about, I think, the internal battles that women our age, or women now, can kind of face thinking about whether to have children or not, and the kind of choices implicit within them, because sometimes you don't have a choice. Sometimes you might try to have a baby and you can't, and there's a kind of a lot of different factors that go into it. But I think also I was really drawn to writing about pregnancy because I think there's just so much in that space. There's so much. I'm really interested into how to dig into, I guess, questions of like human wanting and desire, and something about pregnancy, using it as a way into thinking about those things just felt really raw and deep for me, because it's just again, like I was drawn to what you said earlier about writing about the body, Daisy, and the kind of physicality of existing in the body, and that kind of lack of control in that area. Like that, we have bodies will do things that we don't necessarily want them to do. We can try, or we want, but sometimes life and bodies get in the way.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good. I can't hear Sophie at all now, so this is really turning into disaster zone here. Never mind. We're on. So I'm pretty much sure that you said I've got an idea about what you were saying, even though I couldn't exactly hear you. But Sophie, did you want to terrify us?
I think so. I don't know. When I was writing Boutique originally, I conceptualized it as a horror book, and I had like in mind like cannibalistic pregnant women kind of driving around the country, like tearing people apart and like feasting on them. And then I was like, actually, like scarier to me is, I guess, the idea of like pregnancy is actually quite scary enough as it is. The idea of not having.
Because I think. I mean, look, I know, Daisy, you're a fan of Stephen King, aren't you? You've told us. I mean, and it's the horror that is suppressed in both of your books as well. I mean, there's the unfolding horror of the stories, but actually there is so much suppressed, creeping, sort of strangulated horror, when you can't breathe properly in both of the books. Which it's that suffocating sense, which I in both cases made me put the book down and have to run away for a bit and get to just stand outside. It's very different. I think in both, although both of your books are very different in tone, for me they have that same effect of just feeling that I'm in one of those rooms made by Edgar Allan Poe, where the walls and the ceiling are coming down, and in the end I'm just going to be flattened under the weight of this narrative. Although I wasn't depressed by what you wrote. I mean, given the darkness of it, not negativity, the darkness of it, do you feel that for women, and you can answer this in any way you like, that it is by sort of entering those fearful places that we have the cathartic sense of what can happen in a novel, that we're freed from things we can't even express to ourselves, and then somebody puts them in print on the page, and it's this huge release or relief?
I do think that kind of nightmarish off-kilter space was a really fruitful area in terms of exploring these things. It's almost like kind of perhaps they feel too close to home, and if you can kind of look at them almost like sideways, you can get a new angle, or kind of, I don't know, maybe make more physical something which is more abstract, and in that way, I just love the possibility of fiction. Essentially, I love the idea that I can create rituals for things which have no ritual, and in that way, kind of make sense of them, both for the reader and also, partly for myself.
Daisy, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, I think Sophie makes some great points there, and I think there's definitely something cathartic about horror, about that sort of moment of build up and an eventual release. And I think for me, what I've always loved about horror, and I think particularly horror written by women, so I suppose Shirley Jackson sort of being the queen and the god of this, is that I think in a lot of horror by women, the domestic itself is sort of imbued with this sense of growing unease. So although it may not, there isn't a clown there or a monster on the page, there is something which is building and building and building. And I think Sophie's first book, The Water Cure, it felt a little like that as well. I guess it's sort of, I wonder if we're both trying to make the reader feel like they're in a room which is slowly filling with water. And you're not quite sure how fast the water is coming in or what's going to happen when it reaches the ceiling. But that sense of those very small moments that we all spend our days doing, making cups of tea or having baths or talking on the telephone, that those moments are scary as well, I think is always been really interesting to me. Oh, I think we might have lost her. Sophie, where did the cannibal idea go? Did you write an entire draft of the cannibals and then delete it, or?
No, I kind of didn't really have that legs. Like when you're writing something, you're like, oh, I kind of love the idea of this, but unfortunately, in practice, it's kind of not coming across. And yeah, like I said, pregnancy is kind of terrifying enough already. I didn't need to write about someone, cannibalistic pregnant women. And then maybe I should return to that as a story, because it is fun. It's a lot. It's great fun.
Yeah, it's really fun.
Interesting what you're saying about kind of the the domestic as the site of the uncanny, because I think we have this idea of pregnant women as very milky and serene, and that was something that was really fun to play with in the book. It's actually, what if it's not about serenity and this kind of milkiness, but it's about ripping people to shreds.
Yeah. Hi, Jeanette.
Hello, you can see me now, which is also very exciting, and I can see you. I came back in by another route. Yeah, I've got a thing saying you're back. I'm back. But thinking about this, I mean, the horror idea, the political idea. You're not writing dystopias, are you? I mean, these are dark places. You're in a small domestic dark place, Daisy, which is happening to a family. Mm-hmm. And in Sophie's world, it's happening to a whole generation of young women. And yet in with the lens on these very different scenarios, in both cases, your people are constrained and feel that their choices are absolutely limited in terms of what's possible, except by being fugitive, because both of these novels are about running away in different respects, how to get away from the thing which is holding you back, and what happens if you can't, in your case, what happens if it's inside you. But also, I think, so if it's for you as well, the thing is inside. There is no running away, because this thing is so internalized that it doesn't matter what society is doing. There is no escape, whether it's in the domestic sphere of a family or in the larger sphere of how women's lives are being directed by others. Do you think there is any escape for women?
Mm. Do you want to answer that first, Sophie?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think one of the scariest elements of the ticket is the idea of, the horror is inside you, not literally, but just in terms of things you've internalized about yourself, and kind of coming to realize the society you're in. And yeah, it's kind of that and the self-policing that goes on as well in the world, other women are kind of her enemy, her community and her friends. But I do take a more optimistic view, I think, than what my book would suggest.
But Sophie, you've talked, because you grew up, you speak Welsh, don't you?
Yeah.
And that's a language that you actually use to communicate, I think, with friends and family. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So it's for you. It's a living language. I mean, both of you in different ways have played with the idea of other languages. In everything under Daisy, there's another language going on, a secret language on the canal boat between mother and daughter. I mean, so there's language beneath language, for me all the time in both of your work, the sense that there's something else going on that other people can't hear, that other people can't know about, that only a few people are initiated into. When you're writing, because obviously for the reader there's the language on the page, that's the only way we can communicate with what's inside your head. But are you playing with multiple layers of language as you write, as writers, whether it's an invented language or a second language? You know, what's informing your work? I mean, a bit like a symphony, you know, when you hear the top line of the tune, but underneath there's all sorts of other things going on. Which seems to be informing the writing. And I think in both cases gives it that curiously buoyant effect. Even when the whole thing is dark, the writing itself is floating. It feels like there's something underneath and you think, oh, what's that? Because I can't see it, but it's under there.
Yeah, I think I wonder if writers have to do that, because, you know, you spend all day with just on your own and sort of sat just staring at your words and probably deleting a lot of the words that you've written, and then, you know, crying about them. And so I think you have to, as a writer, create that sense of play, so that you enjoy it, and so it feels like something that you're just doing for yourself. And hopefully that does seep into the writing. And I think that's probably always something I've loved about your writing as well, Jeanette. I think in Frankenstein there's definitely a sense that the language is playing with itself. And I became in Everything Under really fascinated, as you said, with this idea of if you speak a different language from everyone else, and particularly if you make up your own language, how does that change the way you think? And, you know, does Sophie think in a different way because she also speaks Welsh? And do the characters and Everything Under think in a very different way because they've made up their own language which no one else can speak? In this way that language can sort of change the way that we think in a very everyday sense.
I think that's true, because the great thing about the novel being able to do interiority is that we can always hear that ongoing conversation that's normally happening in people's heads, which we're not able to do as we go in and we're living on the surface of our life in our ordinary encounters. We imagine it, but we can't ever see it. And we all know perfectly well, don't we, that there's a duality going on. There's what we're saying and there's what we're thinking, which is what makes most encounters so uncomfortable, because we all know perfectly well there's that behind the room we're in, there's another room where all sorts of other things are happening. And I think, you know, joining together the idea of language and about of horror and also women's experience is the sense that there is always something happening in another room, because women are not in the surface everyday experience. Our lives are hidden, rich, deep, but they're often not counted. And I think all women have this separate language with which to describe their experience that isn't understood by the mainstream patriarchal language, or isn't just included at all. So we have a kind of encoding in our private lives, which I think for both of you as young women writers, it's bringing all those lost languages, lost experiences, lost worlds to the surface. I love the idea there's so much water in both of your books, separately and together. Looking at the four books, that you always seem to be like deep sea divers, going in there and bringing things back up so that we the reader can engage with them. I mean, do you feel there's a process of actually diving under, returning things to the topmost world?
Do you want to answer that, Sophie?
Actually, I love that idea of like diving and bringing things to the top, because I am always surprised, like every time I write a book or anything really, like I'm surprised at how what you think you're writing about is not actually what you are writing about. You can
No, it's really disconcerting. I mean, you do wonder. That's what your early statement about who is this thing that wants to be pregnant. You also think, who is this thing that is writing this book? Excuse me. The idea of the writer in control is such a male fantasy.
Yeah.
It's like, am I writing a book, or am I like literally just psychoanalyzing myself or something, or, you know, x-raying a situation? I want to write about cannibalistic pregnant women, but actually something completely like 5 layers underneath that is what I'm trying to get at. And it's disconcerting, but I think it's now it's kind of a process that I actually kind of love it, and I'm prepared for it. And as well in kind of in the context of language as well, I'm editing is really important to my process, and I don't know how kind of you relate to editing in terms of your language, but every word in my books are like very deliberate, and that kind of use of I guess really like try pummeling the language, dragging and pummeling. It sounds like a, you know, writing to be like an effortless pursuit, but it's really kind of not. There's a lot of heavy.
Oh no, not effortless. No, never that. I think and it is a physical pursuit. I think you're right to use those images. But you know, you're wrestling with something that won't yield very easily, and if it does, then there's often a kind of superficiality there, which in fact is nothing at all. You know, it's easy to get at the topmost stuff, and then as you go down, it's so much harder.
I think as well, you know, in writing women's stories, like you touched upon earlier, Daisy, you know, we're writing about sisterhood, writing about pregnancy, and I think there is this misconception that these are, you know, women's stories, but it's like they're human stories, actually. You know, everyone is born. Many of us have siblings. It's kind of excavating, I guess, these subjects which are not being historically kind of given a kind of gravity, gravity that is deserved.
Which is strange, because we know that most readers of fiction are female, and always have been, and yet still female experience is encoded in ways which are not just unhelpful but completely inaccurate. And I had a strange thing. It's not apropos, nothing at all. I was reading Aristotle again, and you know, it's supposed to be like the big dude, and I just thought, listen, mate, everything you thought was wrong. Everything, and yet there you are, still, you know, this guy at the center of Western philosophy, Western thinking, and I thought, it's all wrong. And I was looking at it, I think men just really give themselves a lot of space to get it wrong. I mean, can you imagine if there'd been a woman who thought stuff and it was all wrong, where we'd be now? So I think when it comes to writing about experience, it's more than that. It's not just the lived experience, is it, which does really matter. It's also the imaginative experience, which is how we think, how we feel, how we put ourselves in the context of the world. You know, actually how we literally read the world as women, which is not the same. And so it matters so much to me. You know, when I look at you, two young women now coming along, making the territory. You know, a great thing that the map is not the territory. Well, you know, writing isn't just a map, it does make territory. And I feel that that's what you're doing. You're explorers for us, and you're going out there and giving us territory for us to live in. You know, you're not selfish. We can all share it. You explore it, you pioneer it, you find it, and then your readers can live there. They don't have to live there forever, but it literally expand us from being in small spaces, even though both books deal with very claustrophobic spaces, both internally and externally. They're so expanding, I think. And I don't know whether we talked a bit about the writer as political, but also the idea that writers make things better. What's wrong with that? Yeah. You feel that you do? I feel that you do.
I hope so. I don't know. I think it's so interesting, Jeanette, how many metaphors you're using about like exploring or diving or, you know, pushing beyond something as a writer. Yeah. And there's the really beautiful poem by Adrienne Rich, Diving into the Wreck, where the character literally dives down into the wreck and begins sort of coming through time. And it's interesting because I think with women writers, there's often this presumption that everything they write is autobiographical. You know, women don't have imagination. They sort of only draw from their own lives. And if they're writing about pregnancy or mothers, it's because they're pregnant or they have a mother. Whereas I think that women writers potentially are sort of doing what you're talking about. They are trying to dive into imagination and imagine something beyond what we can see. And I think there is some kind of catharsis in reading about a world that is a little like ours, but not quite like ours.
Definitely. And you both started short stories. You also wrote poetry, Sophie. So you came in with the shorter forms, and indeed in some ways the microscopic forms where every word has to count, certainly with a poem, because there's no space for error, which I think is why it's such a good discipline. You can't have the bit where you think that's not a very good paragraph, but never mind, because by then you finish the poem. So I think, and also with the short story, it does force a level of concentration, I think, which then, if translated into the bigger narrative, gives that density and that force that can otherwise be lacking, because it can just run on. That's always the danger, isn't it, with prose? That once you start, it does have a momentum. And as writers, I think we're always trying to stop momentum, because it can simply be a byproduct of gravity. You're just rolling the thing downhill. And I think as writers, we're always Sisyphus. We're always pushing the thing uphill. Because momentum isn't in our favour. It's that fight with it to stop it running away with us, which I think is also the struggle of life. How do you stop it running away with you? Just by momentum. And your books have got, I think, I love the way that they're contained. Their shapes. I mean, I think of them geometrically. Inside them, we talked earlier about you putting your people inside these claustrophobic shapes, but your readers too are inside those shapes, and that, just as a theatre space does, allows room for thinking, for being. It's contained, but actually the form itself is not claustrophobic because it's got such strength. Such kinetic strength around it. And I just wondered if you could say something, each of you, a little bit about the way you've come into your writing, the longer form, from the other forms, the previous forms, the short story, the poetic form, and how, because I know a lot of people listening in today will be writing their own stuff, and how this translates across.
I think, coming from poetry, which is obviously very usual, I found it very hard to write long things for a long time, and I had basically a crucial misunderstanding of plot, which I was just like, I don't need it, and it kind of gets in my way. And then once I kind of accepted that, a little plot can be useful, that was kind of a turning point for me. And actually, it kind of relates to what you're saying about that dredging, that diving, because I found that long form for me, if I'm spending time with a work and I am doing the diving work and dredging and sitting with it and things are coming up, I think long form is a way for me to explore that and to be developing those ideas, I suppose, with time, because I cannot really rush the process so much. I've tried to write books quickly and or more quickly than I do, and failed, realizing that kind of slow process is really intrinsic to it. And but I think, I don't know if you find this, Daisy, as someone who writes a lot of short stories, but kind of writing a short story feels like it's a different part of my brain. And it's like, I guess it's like having a sprint when you're used to doing long distance kind of meditative training. But I really like, with long form, that sense of chipping away at something slowly. And I think that's why I have been mainly working in novels recently. And I'm like, I should write a short story as like a treat, as a change. And I'm like, no, but I really like sitting with my long dredgy well or something, a big well, pulling things over. Yeah, I don't know. How do you feel about it, Daisy?
Yeah, short stories were sort of my first love, and whenever I'm doing any teaching, particularly sort of teaching teenagers, I try to instill that in them, because I think it really, as you say, both of you say, they're quite unforgiving. There's no space, as in a poem or a short story, to have a sentence that's not right, or I think you really notice them, or if there's a plot that doesn't quite work. So I think they're a great place to start and to sort of teach you how to write, and I think also teach you how to be very unforgiving in cutting things away and deleting as much as you need to delete. But I really enjoy working on novels and short stories at the same time, because I think each is a relief from the other. I think novels are these sort of enormous baggy monsters with lots of tentacles, and there's space for them to be very spacious and to have lots of things in them. And but at the same time, living with a novel is completely exhausting. I think you live with it for years and years and years. And you carry the characters around with you, and sometimes they're awful characters and you hate them and you hate yourself. So I think it's also then nice to go back to the short story, which you can live with for longer, but is sort of, you can hold all of it in your head, I think, is how I feel about short stories. Yeah.
That's true. I mean, you forget your own books. Believe me, girls, you've got a long way to go. And you start thinking, what? I got a new edition of The Daylight Gate, which is a horrible Halloween sort of nasty book I wrote about the Pendle Witches. And I've not looked at it since I published it. It was about 20, I didn't even know what year it was, 2012 maybe. I looked at it and I thought, what a horrible little book. No, did you get that sense? How could I do this? But we do, and that's so we go on. Listen, there's some questions coming in, so I don't know if you girls want to look down there and see if there's any you want to answer, and just jump in on them. I know there's one there about pandemics. Let's see, naming. Can you see the questions, both of you?
Yeah, I can see.
First drafts is a good, whatever you want to come in on that you like down there. I'm not going to answer any questions, folks, because it's not about me. Go on. Can you see them? Which ones do you want to answer?
About the voice in our head that tells. Can you see it?
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, go on, then go for that one.
Yeah, what do you think, Sophie? Oh,
can you hear? Oh, go on, Daisy, answer, because she's gone off again.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's really hard. And I think my dad describes it as the monkey on your shoulder, and he says everyone has a monkey on their shoulder, but some people have a gorilla, and some people have a small ring-tailed lemur. And they're always whispering into your ear. And I think for me, writing everything under, it was my first novel, and I'd already got a book deal. I had to write it, otherwise I wouldn't have, I would have had to give the very small amount of money back. So I was afraid all of the time. I was crying in coffee shops in Oxford, and deleting immense amounts of words. I probably deleted about 4 books writing that one book. And I think in the end, it was about finding the right process for me, and also really trusting that even if I've written a draft and it hadn't worked and I deleted a lot of words, that was part of the process as well. I think speaking about talking to teenagers about writing again, sometimes I'll sort of say to them, no first draft is a good enough draft. And they sort of have this look of blank horror on their faces at the idea that you would have to write more than one draft. But I think for me, I found that very freeing. The idea that
is that because of social media, or everything's like really just like instant now, so you can't possibly have to do it again?
Maybe, I think it is. I think also we sort of expect people just to know how to edit, and I think learning to edit for me was one of the hardest things about being a writer, and learning how to look at your own work the way a stranger would do, I think is really, really difficult.
Yeah, and I think, for you, because obviously my lot all were able to start on computers, so you don't get drag and drop or instant cut or moving shit around, which means that it's more like rebuilding a dry stone wall. You just have to take the thing back to the bottom. Once there's a saggy gap in it, you can't just think, I'll move that. You have to put it back down. So I think quite a lot of what your generation have had to tackle, simply the actual physical way that writing has changed. So it can look easier than it is. We knew it wasn't very easy because we had Tipp-Ex and scissors. So obviously you couldn't just cut and paste and drag and drop. So I think there's a bit of deceiving going on there. Hello, Sophie. Were you answering that question? Now you're back.
What question? That was the question about
silencing the voice in your head on sort of the first draft.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're just talking then about as well, like kind of writing on computer as opposed to hand, right? I guess like the freedom in that, because knowing that even if it's terrible, that maybe it could be used for something else, or that you can just kind of change it. I don't know if that voice ever goes away. I don't know. Maybe just getting like better coping mechanisms to shut it up temporarily, which I've just kind of try and just tell myself just that I think also knowing that sometimes you have to write the bad stuff to get the good stuff, I suppose, to sort of make way for it, or to empty out what's there already in order to find what's kind of good behind it. Yeah.
Any other question on there that you want to jump in on?
There's also one about our favorite women writers, or our favorite books by women, which I thought was maybe a good one.
God, you're brave. You'll regret that in later life.
Oh no, why?
I never answer that question because it always comes back to bite me later. But go ahead. The confidence of youth.
I hope it doesn't come back to bite me later on, but So I think the books I was reading for sisters were really sort of horror written by women, which I was very excited to get back into. So there's a book by Helen Oyemi, I don't know if either of you read, called White is Bewitching, which is so good, sort of a horror set on the cliffs of Dover, with this house where there are lots of women living inside the walls. And I also did, this definitely won't come back to bite me, but I did reread Frankenstein quite a lot. So I think that's a good, that's a safe call, yeah.
Yeah, well, you said that was my fault because the last line is "Shall we begin again?" and you thought that was an instruction. So trusting. Sophie, what about you? What are you going to risk here as you walk out on a limb?
I'm going to say The Changeling by Joy Williams, because I feel like it's such an amazing book, and I feel like it's one that a lot of people haven't read, because it kind of sunk when it was released like 40 years ago. It's been just re-released actually, I think last year in a fab new edition. And obviously Joy's kind of more known for her short stories, and it's a whole novel sense of just pure weirdness, and it's absolutely amazing. I think like the way she looks at the world is just so she's describing like the uncanny domestic, the way she looks at ordinary things in a way that's like completely new. I really love, and I just find the story behind that novel so interesting as well, that it was released, that it was so far ahead of its time, and got a horrible review in the New York, I think maybe it was the New York or the New York Times, which back in the day when you get a really horrible review and it's totally like the book is dead, like it was quite, it was very ahead of its time.
Yeah. I mean, things find their own time, and that's one of really great now, the way things are being republished, refound, new generations discover it. So there's no reason for despair, even if it's not obvious at the moment. Is there another question there before we? I think nobody's waved at me yet and said you've got to kill everybody and go. Is there another question you want to answer that on that list?
There is a question about COVID and how that's affected our writing process, if we want to answer that one.
Has it affected your writing process? If it has, answer it.
I think it's affected mine a little. I think, obviously, I think writers are sort of used to being on their own, but at the same time, you do go a little bit mad. I work at home mostly, but sometimes also go to coffee shops or, the pub, and try and just change the scene. And I think that really helps when you're stuck on a piece. And I think that's been difficult. I've also been reading a lot slower than I thought I would be, and reading different things. I think all of our brains are perhaps firing at slightly less capacity than they normally are. Yeah.
I'm reading slower, which is interesting because I kind of got more time. I suppose I used to read a lot when I was traveling or on the tube and stuff, and kind of have lost that time. And I don't know, I kind of get it sounds really weird, but I kind of get tired weirdly easy because I feel like a bit kind of overstimulated. So I'll sort of sit in bed and be like, okay, I'm gonna get like 2 hours of reading in, and then just find myself like nodding off. In terms of working, I guess being in the house all the time, like you said, I used to work out the house a lot, and I think also like having more people in the house, like my partner's kind of around me like 24/7 now, which is also great, but you have to kind of find new boundaries in terms of working. And my book that I've been working on in lockdown, it's historical novels. I was actually going to do like quite a lot of research, which was a new thing for me, and I had a residency in Paris, and the book's set in France, so I was going to do a lot of actually traveling down to where the book is set and kind of research it that way. So the book has actually kind of taken a different direction to what I thought it would be. I mean, they kind of always do, but it's actually really interesting thinking in terms of I had a really specific idea of what this book was going to be, and I've not been able to do that work around it. I've had to do a completely different sort of work, and it's turned into a different book. And yeah, it's kind of like the parallel universe novel of what could have been if there hadn't been no corona. But
yeah, I think you're right, and I think it's really important to keep reading something which isn't about the crazy news at the moment, whether it's poetry, short story, anything, just to make the space, all of us, everybody listening in here, to get away from the madness out there, because it is mad. And literature, art is not mad, right? It's not crazy. It's on the side of health. And that's why we need it. And so we have to make space as the world outside does get madder. Even if you just take half an hour and think, you know what, I'm going to read a poem, I'm going to read this story, I don't care, I'm switching off and I'm doing it. That will so help your sense of self and your sense of your place in the world and what the world is actually doing, which is just this mad feedback loop at the minute where nobody really knows what's going on and nothing has changed except it's got crazier. We're coming to the end, and I want everybody out there. Here, look, here we go. I can just about see that. What you have to do is go onto the Manchester Literature Festival site, buy the books through there if possible, make a donation, because Literary Festival's fabulous, but it hasn't got much money. And you know how ridiculous this government is. You also the poster of the ballet dancer who's going to retrain in IT. Our world is not valued by their world because they're Philistines and they're fools. So if you've got a bit of money, help to keep the Manchester Lit Fest going, and also buy the books, right, from Sophie and Daisy, because they're young writers. They need to get on in the world. We need to support them. It's very important that we put our money where our mouth is. And you've come today, and thank you for that. We are at the end. Thank you very much, Sophie. Thank you, Daisy. Sorry, everybody out there, about the technical problems. Please come back into more Manchester events and, follow these two fab writers because they're worth your time and they're worth your imagination. Thank you, Daisy. Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you, Jeanette. Thanks so much, Jeanette.
Yeah. Goodbye.
Oh, yes.